All right, welcome to the Power 2 Pod. My name is Andy.
And I'm Jason.
And on this week's show, we're going to look at Fox Noon and see if it's ruining college football. Then we're going to look at the college football playoff schedule that was released today. Okay, for the Fox Noon, it's the big games for the Big Ten and the Big 12. Seem to be always on at noon now on Fox. And then you have CBS main slot is 3:30 and ABC's is 7:30. This was all last year, of course. This year that's going to be changing because CBS lost the SEC rights. So going into this year, you're going to have Fox Noon be a big game, ESPN at 3:30 be a big game, and then you're going to have a splattering of networks with late games. But I did some number digging based on last year, and if we look at the networks and the games, Fox Noon was the highest viewed games. They averaged 6.7 million viewers a game. CBS averaged 5.7 million, and ABC averaged 4.31 million viewers per game. And so obviously, Fox Noon is a success. I mean, they're averaging a million more viewers than CBS did last year in that time slot. And then ABC is well behind with that 4.3 million. So it really shows, moving the biggest games to noon is really paying off for Fox. And then, the SEC or Big Ten games at 3:30 are lagging a little bit behind. And then the night games that everybody's clamoring for really aren't getting the rankings. I know if you look when there was an Alabama night game that was really highly rated on ESPN, but it wasn't on the ABC time slot where, the ABC is supposed to be the prime game there. If you just hearing those numbers, Jays, do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, and I know me and you have discussed it before, but you don't really want to see your team play in that noon spot when you have a big game coming up. But it makes sense that it's one of like the highest rated or has the most viewership because so many people watch the Fox Noon pregame show, kind of like the ESPN game day and stuff like that. And then with noon just being the first time slot, like Fox usually always has a really good game to watch. So, that's where I feel like a lot of viewership comes from is it's just kicking off the day. Whether your team's playing or not, you're more than likely watching a game on Fox for that noon slot, I feel like. Um, and I think that's where they get a lot of their viewership. And then moving over to like the SEC, we like you said, we had switched from CBS to ESPN now. CBS used to always have like the best games on at 3:30. I've watched numerous Georgia games on that CBS broadcast, and now it's moving to ESPN. And that deal is reported to be almost 5 times the amount that the SEC was getting from CBS. So it's a huge move. It's a huge revenue maker for that conference and the teams within it. Um, and I'm excited for it. I want ESPN to cover more games because historically ESPN like they had College Game Day and then they really didn't cover very many big games at all. It was a lot of low tier games and a lot of the games went to CBS and Fox.
Yeah, I know. Like some of the most viewed games at on ABC at 7:30, which the ABC is the one that has Herb Street and Fowler, and that's supposed to be the big crescendo of the day. And you had like Notre Dame and NC State or Notre Dame and Duke one week was on there. Like it ended up being a great game, but the country's not coming out to watch Notre Dame and Duke. Just like some of the 3:30 games. I think the lowest rated 3:30 CBS game was a Missouri game. So not every week's gonna be great in college football. So you're gonna have those dud weeks. But what I'm really getting down to is, I mean, for me personally, I don't mind a noon game. I get the atmosphere might be a little bit better at 8, 8, 7, whatever time it kicks off at night. But as far as me as a viewing pleasure, I don't mind my team playing at noon a whole lot. I mean, Penn State, I get the whole whiteout thing. You want to have it at night, but your biggest game is probably not going to be at night anymore. It's going to be on Fox Noon. So you're going to pick a secondary game. I think this year it's looking more and more like if you're going to have a night whiteout, Penn State, it's going to be Illinois. Or you could try the 3:30 game against Washington. That's basically the two options for a later game start with a whiteout. But if you also, I mean, if you want to be a hostile home environment, the crowd's going to bring it no matter if that game starts at noon, 3:30, 7, 8, 6, Friday, Thursday, whatever day of the week it is. If you want to be regarded as one of the hardest environments to play in, your school's going to bring it every week and at every time.
Yeah, but I think a lot of it is, and like my personal preference is either noon or a nighttime game. But 90% of the time, Georgia plays at the 3:30 window, so it's just right in the middle of the day.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's for when you're pointing towards like the environment, I understand where noon's a huge disadvantage. Like, not as many people are tailgating. You don't have as much time to tailgate or pregame and all that stuff than you do 3:30 or a night game. Especially now, with a lot of stadiums now opening up like alcohol sales and stuff like that. So I think that makes a big difference of like the college lifestyle of pre-game games, nighttime games. Like, it's a huge difference between a noon game and a night game, just because of all the tailgaters and alcoholic consumption.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I like I said, I'm not a despondent of the Fox Noon game because if you're really looking at the big idea, I mean, it's to get the most eyes on your program, and if you're looking at the numbers only, the most people are watching Fox Noon. So if you get that Fox Noon time slot and you deliver and you win a big game, I mean, that's only going to do more for your program and move it forward because you had more eyes on it. Where if you move to a 3:30 game, which or a night game that's not on ESPN, ABC, you're gonna you're gonna see at least a million or 2 million less viewers. So then you're not getting that program defining win where the entire country is glued in on their TV. Because if you look at it, Fox is the only network really putting big games in at noon. So you're getting the start of your day. It's that big game. Everybody's watching, like you said. And if your team delivers, I mean, you just won a big game with the most eyes that week that's on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I also did a breakdown of the top 15 regular season games and kind of which network had the most. So out of your top 15 regular season games, Fox Noon had 6 of the top games, CBS had 2, and ABC only had 1 of the top 15 regular season games. If you look at some of the others that filled in, you had a rogue, SEC night game. You had a couple SEC night games on ESPN that climbed into those rankings. You had, a rogue NBC night game for Ohio State or Michigan also got in that top rankings. So it really shows that, Fox Noon is going to be the highest rated games if these numbers keep up. It'll be interesting to see, though, with ESPN taking over that 3:30 slot for the SEC and picking which game they want to put there. I think it's going to be really interesting to see if these numbers skew one way or another this coming season with the brand of ESPN and see if they can actually compete with that Fox Noon as, Big Ten kind of moves out of the way at 3:30 and keeps their main games at noon, and then they are going on CBS and NBC and Peacock at night. So it's kind of like the two conferences are getting out of the way of each other. SEC is like, okay, Big Ten, Big 12, you guys can have the noon window. We don't want it. We'll take the 3:30 window, and then the night window is just kind of a free for all. Sometimes you'll have a good game, sometimes you won't.
Yeah, so I think ESPN will be able to fill those 3:30 slot games with the amount of SEC rivalry games that I think would fill that spot really well. You have the Georgia Auburn rivalry. You have the Iron Bowl between Alabama and Auburn, and then Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC. So you get the Red River Shootout now. Arguably one of the best rivalries in all of football. Will now be on ESPN, hopefully, for the SEC. And then you got LSU and Alabama. So I think a lot of those games could fill the 3:30 slot to just help the ESPN with their ratings.
Yeah, I think if you look at the SEC and kind of their schedule, who's all in there, I think it has the potential based on the scheduling for the SEC to have a lot more high profile games than the Big Ten. Because if you look at the Big Ten, I mean, really in the grand scheme of things, you're looking at Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Iowa might get in there, Washington. You're not looking at a ton of teams. You're not looking at as many teams as the SEC is looking at that, are going to bring the viewers and bring the rivalries. We have a lot of the, gimmicky trophy games between, Minnesota and Wisconsin that doesn't really deserve national spotlight. And you have many of those in the Big Ten where I think that's where the SEC holds the advantage over the Big Ten is when you have a rivalry. It's a big game over in the SEC.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so too.
All right, let's move on to the college football playoff schedule that was released today. Just looking at it, it gives us the schedule and how everything breaks out. So the first round of the playoffs is going to begin on the 20th of December on a Friday, and then you're going to have 3 Saturday games at noon, 4, and 8. And then quarterfinals will happen on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. And then the semifinals will happen on the 9th and 10th of January. And then the national title will happen on January 20th now. If you're looking at it, as you guys probably know, the first round of the playoffs is going to be a home game for those 4 matchups. It's going to be on campus, which is going to be something we've never seen before. No matter how, you go back as far as you want to go, you haven't seen home games near Christmas on these campuses. It's going to be really interesting with, some of those teams are going to be Big Ten teams that are up north, and it could get really interesting with weather and stuff like that. So I think that's going to be one of the cool things about the college football playoff expanding to 12 teams is you're getting those campus games in December. And then just looking at kind of like who wins, who loses with this, I think you're really at a disadvantage if you lose the conference title game. So if you're the Big Ten or SEC title game loser, I mean, if you were going to go on to win the national championship game, you're going to have to play 17 games that season, which is unheard of in college football. I think the most a team's played is 15. Michigan, Georgia went 15-0. We haven't seen college teams go 17 games. I mean, that's an NFL regular season. So I think the downfall of the 12-team playoff is you might have some teams that play a lot more games than they're used to.
Yeah, and I think it's exciting to finally have some home field advantage in these playoff games. Obviously, some of the, I guess, skepticism of it is that, like you said, if the teams up north, like Michigan or Penn State, teams like that, they could very well have a handful of snow in those December games. And, like some people love football in the snow and all that, but like if it's a lot, it really affects the game into where like you really can't pass and it's just who can run better. It's just really not exciting. It's not good for the game, but I think it evens the field, especially for Big Ten, having teams come up north because for historical timeline, everything's been down south. So, all these bowl games and stuff like that is down south, out west. So all those Midwest teams have to travel so far, and they play their late games, like late conference games in November, which gets cold. Here in Michigan, Ohio, and Minnesota. So, like I said, when you're going out west or down south, and it's a 40-degree change in heat, that affects players and all the preparation of the game. So I think it definitely does even the field overall. One thing I don't like about the schedule is the semifinals being played on a Thursday. I don't like that at all. I think that they should combine that on a Saturday and play two games on a Saturday like they do for New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, where they have two time slots.
It's
I don't
it,
know why they
it's
would do a game Thursday and a game Friday.
it's NFL driven. The NFL took Friday and Saturday, so it's driven by the NFL schedule. The college football playoff is working around the NFL and trying not to compete directly with the NFL. So that's why those games are on Thursday and Friday. Is just to avoid it's to avoid Saturday because the NFL has a full slate Saturday. They have the 1 o'clock game, 4 o'clock game, night game. So it's to avoid losing out on those fans that are going to pick the NFL over the college football game. And then going
Yeah,
back to the first round playoff games where you're going to have home field advantage, I think you could get some really cool scenarios where you're getting, say Alabama or Georgia coming up to Ohio State or coming up to Penn State or Michigan, and it could be miserable. It could be 20 degrees, 20-mile-per-hour winds. But at that same point, like you said, by having these games on campuses and they're coming up north, you could really get away from what makes those teams good, and then you're kind of skewing the game away from, hey, if we just had this, say in Indianapolis, which is up north but in a dome, you're not really getting the full effect of who's actually the better team. So I think that's where that's the downfall of the games come that could possibly come up north in December, is you could not get the best actual game itself, as teams are going to have to play to the weather, which they haven't had to all year.
yeah. Like you said, it definitely just evens the field, and it's exciting. You're gonna see a lot of teams travel where they may have never played before. When these playoffs, play out the way they will, um, it'll definitely be interesting to see. And I think it'll just, like I said, it's different type of football. When Georgia, plays in nothing but 70 and up weather, and then you got to go up north and play in 20-degree weather, it's going to make a difference. Just like
Hey,
it does
it
for
was
the Big
cold when
Ten
we went to
teams now.
Kentucky.
Yeah, it
When
was
we went and
windy,
watched Georgia at
cold, and
Kentucky, it
windy.
was cold.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that
that's not
wasn't
that
that
far
late in the
north.
season. I feel like, yeah,
No, it was windy as all get out, and it just was. I feel like it was like 40 degrees. We had hand warmers, foot warmers, and we drove 5 hours south, and it was still cold.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
then like I didn't even think of like some of the like kind of like odd matchups you could see. I mean, you could see LSU going to the Horseshoe, or Missouri coming up to Michigan, or Ole Miss going to Penn State. Like just these matchups you wouldn't see otherwise is what's going to be cool, and even vice versa. Having Ohio State go down to Tuscaloosa, or Oregon going to Baton Rouge, and Michigan going down to Athens. Like it goes both ways. So that's what's going to be cool about expanding the playoff, is you're going to get these matchups on campus, which is the best part, and it's going to be matchups you'd never see unless the playoff expanded.
Yeah, and honestly, I understand what they're doing with, you're getting in your, like, the New York City Bowl games, the Rose Bowl, the, Sugar Bowl, Peach Bowl, and all those. But it would be nice to see home field advantage for the quarterfinals, because if you're a top four team, you won your conference and all that. At the end of the day, you get a bye week, which is, a huge difference. I'm sure that we're going to see when the playoffs come. But you lose all your chance of hosting a game. Hosting a game in your campus like that. So, like I said, I understand why they do it. They're keeping the integrity of the New York Six Bowl games, and the locations of those games. But it would be, it's just, it sucks for the school if you're a top four team and you don't get a playoff home game.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you look at the bowl games, and the closest one for a Big Ten team is probably going to be Georgia for the Peach Bowl, or you're looking at Louisiana for the Sugar Bowl. So, I mean, there's nothing. I mean, the other option is Arizona for the Fiesta Bowl and California for the Rose Bowl. So, I mean, if USC or UCLA, Oregon, they get in and get to the Rose Bowl, not so bad for them. But if you're looking at the traditional Big Ten teams and looking at what's there's not a close location for one of those bowl games that are taking the quarterfinals and semifinals. Yeah. And I'm also kind of stuck on the whole they can play 17 games. I mean, that's a lot of games for, 18 to 22-year-old kids, especially with, roster limits and all this type of stuff. That's going to be a lot of wear and tear. It could provide, because you look throughout the last few years since the 4-team playoff, for the most part, teams have been healthy. I mean, Ohio State won it that one year with their third string quarterback, but besides that, pretty much, the top four matchups have been relatively healthy teams. And with going to, 4 rounds of playoffs, and like I said, you could get upwards of 17 games. I almost wonder by the end of it, is it last man standing or is it actually the best team?
Right. Yeah, and that's definitely something to think about. And you think about just last year. If Jordan Travis didn't get hurt, I feel like Florida State would have made it in that Final Four spot, to where they got pushed out. They played a tough game against Louisville in their championship game, but that was with their backup quarterback. I think if Jordan Travis didn't get hurt, I think they would have made the playoffs. So you look forward to this year when you got teams making it to the semifinals or even the quarterfinals. If you get a serious playmaker hurt, like you said, it's not really going to be the best team that wins. It's just almost luck of the draw of, Carson Beck got hurt and Georgia doesn't have their quarterback, or, vice versa with anybody. So hopefully that doesn't happen
Right, right. I mean,
with this
with the new
extended playoffs. But, more games is more wear and tear. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and with the transfer portal and NIL now, it's really hard for these big schools to keep their depth that they are used to keeping. If that 5-star recruit doesn't see the field his freshman or sophomore year, more than likely he's transferring out. So now it's really hard for these top tier teams to keep their talent and keep the depth that's needed to really compete. So it's gonna be really interesting to see, like you said, with this expanded playoff, the expanded amount of games, to see exactly who's gonna win. Is it gonna be, because I feel like with the 14 playoff, we've gotten the best team more times than not to win the championship.
Yeah, I mean, outside of this last year, it was really tough with Georgia with a one-loss team in the SEC. Florida State, they're undefeated, right, and
Yeah,
not make it in. So, and then you had Ohio State not make it in, right?
yeah, they had the one loss to Michigan. That was their only
And
loss.
yeah. So arguably that last year was probably one of the best years for college football, just record wise, with having that many good teams. There was a lock for a top 8 teams for sure of the country that could have easily made those top 8 spots.
And I think that's where, if they did get the playoff expansion wrong, I think they went to 12 way too soon. I mean, you're going 4 to 12. Why not go 4 to 8? Because in most years, like you said, last year was kind of the outlier where you had actually like 7 or 8 teams where you thought, things go right, they could win a title. Where, for most of the years, it's like that the teams 5 through 8, they didn't stand a chance to win the title, and we got the top 4 teams, and we got a rightful national title, national champion. And why didn't we go to 8? Why did we just, go straight to 12? I know it's a money play and all that type of stuff, but I think it would have been really cool to see an 18 playoff to start, where, those first 4 games are at home, and then you get to the bowl games for the semi and the final. But, money is now what's winning out in college football, so you don't get to make little changes like that and see how it works out.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with that. I always, when they originally came out with the 12 man or 12 team playoff format, I honestly thought it was better to be six, and the first two would get a bye, and then you do three, four, five, and six.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because to me, if you're not a top six team in the country, do you really you know belong in the playoffs? Like I said, are you really a national championship contender at 8, 9, 10, even 11, 12?
Mm-hmm.
Like in that 12 seed, it's like, what are the odds that that 12 seed that's going to be not, a non-power 4, 5, whatever you want to say, um, you know, how, like you said, you got to win 17 games. Is Liberty, Boise State, Memphis, are they going to be able to really just go through the gauntlet of an away game in the first round and then win in three more games? It's just the odds are going to be astronomical. So, and like you said, with even going to eight, like you said, you got to be basically a top 8, 10, top 10, 8 team to make the playoffs or to be considered to be the playoffs. Like, I think eight would have been perfect too. 12 is a bit much, like you said, just kind of too much too fast. But like you said, it's all about money. So
Yeah, and I think if you look at it and really study it, I mean, it's the 5-12 matchup. It's gonna be a lot of blowouts. I feel like because you're getting the best team that didn't win its conference title basically against the best group of five team. There's a lot of potential in those first round games for blowouts and not good games. I think you could see a lot of uncompetitive games there in the first round of playoffs, especially being on campus games. I think it's a recipe for, I don't want to say disaster because it's still going to be fun to watch, but it's got a lot of potential to pop out a few duds that first round.
yeah, and I mean, I understand it. You see the March Madness tournament, and you always have a 16 or 15 or 14 seed do that one miracle win, and so I could see the 12 or 11 seed making a miracle win. But like I go back to you know 10, 11, and 12. What are your odds to actually be a national contender? Especially the non-power five. It's just not going to happen. Like I said, you could really grind out one upset win. I'm sure is going to happen in the next few years, but besides that, you're going to lose the next game or the game after that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think that'll do it for the college football schedule talk there. So let's move on to the Penn State Minute. For the Penn State Minute this week, pretty much just going to talk about the whiteout and how there's a lot of discourse right now on social media about what Penn State should do with the whiteout because it appears that there's not going to be a top tier night game for Penn State to have their annual whiteout. So they're really battling with the, do we have to have the whiteout at night or can we do a whiteout at noon? Because the big game on the schedule this year for home is Ohio State, and it was just released that Fox and NBC have the rights to it. Fox has the choice. Fox can make it a big noon game, or if they don't choose it, NBC gets it at night. But that decision is not going to be made until I think it's like 12 days before the game. So does Penn State hold on to its whiteout, hoping that the Ohio State game gets moved to the night game, or do they save it for Ohio State and have it a noon whiteout, which it just doesn't hit the same, but I also understand it. Because right now, if you look at the schedule, the best night home game is Illinois, which, I mean, you look at the last two whiteouts, you had Minnesota, and then last year you had Iowa. So the top tier of it's really falling down. You're not getting the Michigan at night. You're not getting Ohio State at night. You're not getting who you really want at night for that atmosphere. But at the same time, if Ohio State's at noon, the crowd's got to bring it and make it just as good as the whiteout, even though it's not at night. So, I mean, that's pretty much the big discourse with Penn State right now is what to do. Well, they're wrestling around with what to do with the whiteout.
Yeah. And I understand, as a fan, you want the best experience, and that is a whiteout at night. But as at least for me, as an outsider looking in, to me, you should use your most electric atmosphere for your biggest game, whether it's noon, 3:30, prime time. To me, your whiteout should always be Ohio State or Michigan. Those top tier games of your home game should be a whiteout. I get that a noon whiteout's not the same as a nighttime, but and you guys have done different things in the past that are still exciting and interesting. Like I said, you use your whiteout for the Ohio State game, and then you have that Illinois night game. You could always do a stripe out where you guys do blue and white every section.
Hmm.
That always looks cool. It still would bring energy to the game and to that stadium. So to me, the best case scenario would to save that whiteout for your biggest game, home game, no matter the time slot.
Yeah, and I also think it comes down to who is win one of the big games, beat Ohio State, beat Michigan, and then you might have a little bit more to say when it comes to scheduling these games because there's politics involved and hey we'd really like this game to be at this time. Well, if you're not delivering in those prime time slots, or if you're not delivering against your biggest opponents, you don't have any leverage in those spots. So I think Penn State could really help themselves out by you know, beat Ohio State this year, beat Washington, beat UCLA, beat the teams, and that'll lead to the leverage that you might need to get that one game you really want at night to talk the TV networks into okay, let's put this game at night because then we know we're going to get the atmosphere, but are we going to get the best game because Penn State's just above 500 in their
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. Um, like you said, with you being a Penn State fan, like you said, me as an outsider looking in, it's they never win that big game. They can't be Ohio State. The last couple years, it can't be Michigan, and you just have 10-3, 11-2 seasons back to back to back to back, not making a Big Ten championship game. It's hard. It's hard to make that, you know, a priority to get Penn State in a prime time slot when the game is, when the game matters. Because honestly, again, with last year, Penn State playing Ohio State, to me, that game was just not really a good game that it should be. It was two top 10 appointments at the time, and it was just a very stale game. It was a very defensive heavy game, which is pretty Big Ten, normal. But it just lacked to me the big game like atmosphere. Like I felt like everybody kind of was, you know, everybody kind of had an idea like Ohio State was going to pull it out, especially being a home game, yes, last year. So yeah, yeah, I agree with that. But at the end of the day, it's not like Penn State. It's just a rock and a hard place because yeah, you lose those games, Ohio State and Michigan, and that. But at the end of the day, like last year, yeah, you lost to Michigan, but they ended up being the national championship, or national champions. And the year before that, Ohio State made the playoffs. So it's like these losses are not just like something to mull over. It's just tough teams. It's just that's just the competition that the Big Ten brings. So it's just unfortunate. Yep. Starting out, like I said last week on our last episode, Georgia held their annual scavenger hunt, which usually brings in um, a lot of really high caliber recruits. And the result of that is Zayden Walker, who is a 5-star linebacker who went to that event, announced his commitment to Georgia. He's the 10th overall prospect in 2025 class, the number 2 linebacker. So that was really cool to see that he was a recruit that wanted to be a part of that scavenger hunt event, and then a week later he announces his commitment. So, it's another notch on Kirby Smart's belt of his recruitment strategy and his just recent success. So it's always good news for that. Looking forward to some of the betting lines for Georgia. They open their season opener on week 0 against Clemson. It's not a home game; it's actually in Atlanta. But Georgia opens up as minus 13.5. At first, I was a little bit skeptical whether they could win by 2 touchdowns. Um, but looking at Clemson, I don't see where they have, you know, improved leaps and strides from last year. And we played Clemson 2 years ago, I think it was, for the season opener, and that was a brawl. I mean, that was ended up being like 10-3. It was a very defensive heavy game. Both offenses struggled. We have a lot of talent come back on the offense, so I think Georgia will put up some points in this game. I don't see Clemson's offense really, shooting forward and keeping it within 2 touchdowns. I'm definitely comfortable with Georgia winning by 17-20 in that one. Another one looking forward that I really like is Georgia travels to Alabama, and right now the line is Georgia minus 3.5. I really like Georgia in that line too. I get that Tuscaloosa is a crazy atmosphere to have an away game at, but with DeBauer being the first year in, also the first year in the SEC, I think it's just going to be a lot of transition for that team and for that staff. So I definitely like Georgia minus 3.5 there. And then for my last point, for total wins, Georgia, the line is over under 10.5. And Georgia over 10 is minus 122. That means, honestly, they could lose to Texas and lose to Ole Miss, which Ole Miss is an away game. It's at Ole Miss. We go to Alabama, and I think we have Texas at home. So, like I said, those are the two games I could see Georgia struggling and possibly lose, depending on their preparation and how the outcome comes. But, you know, with them, that you're still 11-2, and you'd still hit that 10.5 over. So I think that's a really nice betting line for Georgia fans. That was it for me. So nice. Yeah. I'm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's all I have for my Georgia Minute. Like I said, we've been trying to put out episodes every week, so please like, share, subscribe to grow the channel and grow the community, especially for SEC and Big Ten football fans. So we will see you next week.